Saudi Arabia has just issued a stark warning to Israel, saying its West Bank land seizures could lead to explosive regional consequences. This is not just politics. This could reshape Middle East alliances and even global security. Stay tuned, because what I'm about to share could change how you see the future of this conflict. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today's story is making waves across the globe. Saudi Arabia, one of the most influential players in the Middle East, has sent a very strong message to Israel over its latest actions in the West Bank. In recent weeks, Israel has accelerated the approval of settlements and land seizures, angering Palestinians and drawing criticism from the international community. But now, Riyadh is warning that these actions could have consequences not just for Palestinians, but for Israel's own security and regional standing. Why is this so significant? For years, Saudi Arabia has been seen as a potential partner for normalization with Israel under the USC-backed Abraham Accords framework. Talks had been quietly progressing, raising hopes that Saudi Arabia might join other Arab nations like the UAE and Bahrain in recognizing Israel. But this latest development throws a major wrench into that possibility. Saudi officials are signaling that continued West Bank seizures could derail any chance of normalization, strain diplomatic relations, and possibly spark wider unrest. This is not just a warning, it's a political shot across the bow that Israel and its allies can't afford to ignore. In this video, we'll break this story down into 10 sections, explaining what's happening, why it matters, and what could come next for the region. Stick with me. You need to hear this to understand just how big this moment is. Let's start by laying out the facts of what's happening on the ground. Over the past few weeks, Israel has announced new plans to seize and reclassify large portions of land in the occupied West Bank. These moves are part of a long-standing strategy to expand settlements, housing projects for Israeli citizens built on territory that Palestinians view as part of their future state. According to multiple reports, hundreds of hectares of land have been earmarked for state control, which is often the first step toward settlement construction. This decision has drawn sharp criticism from Palestinians who see it as yet another blow to the possibility of a two-state solution. International law considers Israeli settlements in occupied territory illegal, though Israel disputes this. The international community, including the United Nations, the European Union, and now Saudi Arabia, sees these actions as unilateral steps that undermine peace efforts. Saudi Arabia's concern is that these moves could spark further violence in the West Bank, fuel anger across the Arab world, and make any future peace deal politically impossible. For Israel, it's a calculated risk expand territory now while right-wing parties hold power, even if it risks alienating potential partners. The timing is also critical, with tensions already high due to clashes in places like Jenin and Nablus. Any further escalation could easily ignite a wider conflict. This is why Saudi Arabia's warning is so serious. It's a signal that patience may be running out. Saudi Arabia's statement wasn't just routine diplomatic language, it was unusually blunt. Riyadh explicitly warned that Israel's settlement expansion and land seizures could have explosive consequences for the region. In diplomatic terms, that is a strong phrase. The Saudi Foreign Ministry made clear that it views these actions as a direct threat to regional stability and to the rights of Palestinians. Historically, Saudi Arabia has tied normalization with Israel to meaningful progress on the Palestinian issue, including steps toward a two-state solution. The 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which Saudi Arabia spearheaded, offered Israel full normalization in exchange for a full withdrawal from occupied territories and the establishment of a Palestinian state. While much has changed since 2002, that basic principle still guides Saudi policy. By issuing this warning, Riyadh is reminding Israel, and perhaps also Washington, that there are red lines that cannot be crossed without consequences. The Saudis are likely under pressure from their own public opinion as well. Despite quiet support for normalization among some elites, the Palestinian issue still resonates deeply with ordinary Saudis and the wider Arab public. This puts Israel in a difficult position. If it ignores Saudi Arabia's warning and continues with its plans, it risks losing a historic opportunity for peace and cooperation with one of the most powerful Arab states. On the other hand, backing down could create political backlash for Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, which relies on pro-settlement parties. One of the biggest consequences of this Saudi warning could be on the highly anticipated normalization talks between the two countries. For months, there have been quiet back-channel discussions between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States aimed at building a framework for diplomatic relations. Such a deal would be historic. It would represent the biggest breakthrough in Arab-Israeli relations since the peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan. But normalization has always been contingent on some form of concession to the Palestinians. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, also known as MBS, has hinted that while he is open to working with Israel, he cannot ignore the Palestinian cause entirely. This warning might be Riyadh's way of putting pressure on Israel to freeze or reverse its latest land seizures as a precondition for continuing the talks. The Biden administration has also been pushing for progress on normalization as a key foreign policy win. Washington sees a Saudi-Israel deal as a way to create a united regional front against Iran and to stabilize the region economically. But this latest flare-up complicates those efforts. If Israel refuses to budge, Saudi Arabia may walk away from the table, at least temporarily, and that would be a major setback for U.S. diplomacy. It could also push Saudi Arabia closer to other regional players like China and Russia, who have been expanding their influence in the Middle East through economic and security partnerships. Saudi Arabia is not the only country voicing concern over Israel's West Bank actions. Other Arab states, including Jordan, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates, have also issued statements condemning settlement expansion. Jordan, in particular, has warned that these moves threaten the fragile stability of the West Bank, where tensions are already high between Israeli forces and Palestinian residents. The wider Arab public is also watching closely. Social media across the region has been flooded with calls to pressure Israel diplomatically and economically if it continues down this path. This kind of public sentiment can create real pressure on governments, even those that have normalized relations with Israel. Iran, meanwhile, has seized on the situation to criticize both Israel and Arab states that have signed normalization agreements. Tehran sees Israeli settlement expansion as proof that peace with Israel is a betrayal of Palestinian rights. This narrative helps Iran strengthen its alliances with militant groups in the region, including Hamas and Hezbollah. Even outside the Middle East, European nations have expressed alarm. The EU has repeatedly called for an immediate halt to settlement activity, warning that it undermines peace efforts. The US response has been more cautious, typically urging restraint rather than outright condemnation. All of this means that Israel is facing a growing chorus of criticism. The longer it continues settlement expansion, the more isolated it risks becoming, not just diplomatically, but in terms of public opinion worldwide. Inside Israel, the government's decision to accelerate land seizures is largely driven by domestic politics. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu leads a right-wing coalition that relies heavily on parties that strongly support settlement expansion. For these groups, building and expanding settlements is not just a policy choice, it is an ideological mission. They view the West Bank, which they often call by its biblical names Judea and Samaria, as an inseparable part of the Jewish homeland. This means that even if there is international backlash, Netanyahu's political survival depends on keeping his coalition partners happy. Rolling back or halting settlement activity could trigger a government crisis, potentially leading to new elections. This makes it very difficult for Israel's leadership to compromise, even in the face of strong warnings from Saudi Arabia or pressure from the US. At the same time, there are Israelis who oppose these policies, warning that continued settlement expansion endangers Israel's long-term security and its identity as a democratic state. They argue that alienating potential Arab partners like Saudi Arabia is a strategic mistake that will leave Israel more isolated in the future. This internal debate is intense, but right now, the hardline voices are winning. That means we should expect settlement activity to continue, and therefore more friction with Saudi Arabia and other concerned nations in the weeks ahead. Saudi Arabia's warning about explosive consequences should not be taken lightly. The Middle East is already a highly volatile region, and the West Bank has seen repeated cycles of violence in recent years. If settlement expansion continues unchecked, we could see a new wave of protests, clashes, and potentially even a third intifada. Such unrest would not be limited to the West Bank. It could spill over into Gaza, where militant groups would seize the opportunity to launch rocket attacks. This, in turn, would trigger Israeli military responses, raising the risk of a broader conflict. Regionally, anger over the West Bank could fuel protests in neighboring countries, putting pressure on governments like Jordan and Egypt, which have peace treaties with Israel but face strong public sympathy for the Palestinian cause. This could destabilize those governments or force them to take a harder line against Israel. From a security perspective, Israel risks fighting multiple fronts, dealing with unrest in the West Bank, rocket fire from Gaza, and possible escalation from Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is the explosive scenario that Saudi Arabia is warning about, a chain reaction of violence that could engulf the region and undo years of diplomatic progress. For Saudi Arabia, preventing this kind of escalation is not just about protecting Palestinians. It's about preventing regional chaos that could threaten its own stability and economic plans, including Vision 2030, which depends on a stable environment for investment. Beyond the security risks, there are also serious economic and diplomatic consequences at stake. Saudi Arabia is the largest economy in the Arab world and wields significant influence in global energy markets. If relations with Israel deteriorate, Riyadh could use its economic leverage in various ways, from slowing cooperation on shared projects to rallying other Muslim-majority countries to take diplomatic measures. This could also affect Israel's growing trade relations with Gulf states. Since the Abraham Accords, Israel has benefited from increased trade and investment from the UAE and Bahrain. If Saudi Arabia, the most influential Gulf state, signals disapproval strongly enough, it could slow the momentum of these partnerships. Internationally, Israel risks straining its relations with key Western allies. European countries, in particular, have been increasingly critical of settlement activity and could impose measures like labeling settlement products or even restricting trade, while the U.S. is less likely to take punitive action. A public rift with Saudi Arabia would put Washington in a difficult position as it tries to balance support for Israel with maintaining ties to Riyadh. For Saudi Arabia, this moment is a chance to reassert its leadership in the Arab and Muslim world. By taking a firm stand, it signals to its population and to other regional players that it will defend Palestinian rights. This could strengthen its position diplomatically, but it also raises the stakes if Israel ignores the warning. The implications of this Saudi-Israel standoff go far beyond the Middle East. The global community is watching closely. because instability in the region affects everything from oil prices to global security. If tensions escalate into violence, we could see spikes in energy costs, disruptions to shipping lanes, and increased pressure on global supply chains. Geopolitically, this could also become another flashpoint in the competition between major powers. The U.S. wants to keep Saudi Arabia in its orbit and prevent it from aligning too closely with China or Russia. If Washington cannot broker progress on the Palestinian issue, Riyadh might turn to other partners who are willing to support its positions more strongly. For China, this could be an opportunity to expand its diplomatic footprint in the Middle East. Beijing recently brokered a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, showing that it can play a peacemaking role. A more assertive Chinese presence could challenge U.S. influence in the region. Even for countries far away, instability in the Middle East means potential refugee flows, terrorism risks, and economic disruptions. That's why this issue matters to everyone, not just those living in the region. Saudi Arabia's warning is therefore not just a local message to Israel, but a global alert that continued land seizures could trigger a crisis with worldwide consequences. The question now is whether Israel and its allies are willing to heed that warning before it's too late. So, where does this leave us? Saudi Arabia's warning to Israel is more than just words. It's a sign that the window for diplomacy is narrowing. The next few weeks will be critical. If Israel continues its land seizures, we could see a major diplomatic rift between Riyadh and Jerusalem, stalled normalization talks, and even rising unrest across the region. But there is still a chance to avoid the worst-case scenario. If Israel pauses or reverses its settlement expansion, it could signal good faith and revive the possibility of a breakthrough peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. This would not only improve Israel's standing in the Arab world, but also create new economic and security opportunities for both countries. The U.S. will play a key role in this process. Washington can use its influence to encourage compromise and keep both sides talking. Whether it will succeed remains to be seen. For now, what's clear is that the situation is delicate and the stakes are high. Saudi Arabia has drawn a red line, and how Israel responds will shape the future of Middle East diplomacy for years to come.